Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. When something goes on sale at an auction, we generally refer to that thing as being under the hammer. And we say that because the cost of the thing literally will be discussed while that hammer is brought down on top of the table. Now, let me explain a little bit. I'm sure in the movies and in your country too, you've been to an auction. A man stands at the front and he has a little hammer and he hits the desk with it. So perhaps, for example, he's trying to sell something, let's say a computer, and he says, okay, who will give me £10 for this computer? And then another man will raise his hand and say, I will give 10. Someone else will say 20. And the third person in the audience will say 40. And this will continue. And then the man will say, anyone else? Anyone else will give me any more than 40 for this computer? And if he doesn't get any more bids, he will hit the desk with a hammer and say, sold, to the man at the back wearing the hats. So that is why we say under the hammer, because the hammer will come down on the table when the final price is made. Now, I'll give you a few examples, okay, about things being under the hammer. When you go to auction, you can buy some very good deals which are under the hammer. Last week, Winston Churchill's teeth were under the hammer, and I told you about that in a podcast. A set of 4 chairs and a table will go under the hammer tomorrow morning. So it just means they will be at an auction or sold at an auction. Under the hammer. It's a very, very common phrase, and you can expect to hear that more and more. Now, we say under the hammer, but there's other phrases we use too, which begin with under. Actors and actresses who decide to change their face or have plastic surgery, we often refer to that as being under the knife. Under the knife. So, for example, that actress will go under the knife to look completely different. So, of course, under the hammer, under the knife, and you've heard of people being ill. We often refer to those as being under the weather. If you listen to this podcast regularly, you should already be familiar with the phrase under the counter, and that's the same as under the table. It refers to transactions or exchanges which are done secretly, especially because they are unauthorized or illicit. So there we are, under the hammer. Now, speaking of things being under the hammer, I see in the news today that a bullet from the gun that killed John Lennon is going under the hammer. This is a little bit strange, this story. Let me try to explain. So, a British policeman went to New York. He apparently took a bunch of kids there, kids who were interested in becoming police officers when they got older. And while he was in New York, traveling with the New York Police Department, there was a criminal incident and they were shot at by a gang of criminals, or whoever it was, I don't know. And to say sorry, the New York Police Department took this policeman to the New York Police Museum. And the story goes that this police officer was allowed to handle and use the gun which killed John Lennon. And the bullet that this British police officer shot from the gun in New York, he kept it. And that police officer has now died, and the bullet that he shot from the gun, the same gun that killed John Lennon, is now going under the hammer. Now, this is a bit of a weird story, isn't it? Because it doesn't directly relate to John Lennon. It relates to the gun that killed John Lennon. So let me just summarize this again. So you have this British police officer who went to America, who went to a police museum, who was allowed to handle the gun that killed John Lennon. This police officer shot a bullet from this gun and kept the bullet that he shot. Isn't that a bit of a tenuous link? Maybe it's just me, but that sounds really weird. And it sounds really weird for a couple of reasons. The first reason it sounds really weird is the fact that that gun is on display somewhere. The second reason it sounds really weird, that a policeman was allowed to take it from the cabinet, go to a shooting range, presumably that's where they went, and shoot it. And the third really dark reason that it's really weird is he kept the bullet, brought it back to the UK, and it's now being sold. Isn't that just weird? And how can any of this be proven anyway? Of course, I'm in no way disputing this story, but the whole thing just sounds odd. It says here that it's going to be sold at auction on the 29th of February, and auctioneers are unsure what kind of value it will attract. Well, I suppose if the gun is sitting in a museum, there's no way that's ever going to be sold. The bullet that killed John Lennon, who knows where that is? That's never going to see the light of day either. So I guess this bullet that this guy fired from the same gun, which again, it's really weird, especially in these days of gun crime and everything else. It's very odd that they're trying to sell this. The auctioneer said, very seldom did you get something so unusual and unique. Seldom means rarely. And they're saying it's difficult to know what it's worth and whether there's a market for it. It's a really interesting piece of Beatles memorabilia that probably can't be replicated. Yeah, but it's not a piece of Beatles memorabilia, is it? The Beatles had gone by the time John Lennon was shot. Am I not correct in saying that? Maybe I'm wrong. And also, it killed a person. I wouldn't call that Beatles memorabilia. That sounds really creepy and dark. But anyway, apparently this auction house has carried out intensive investigations to satisfy themselves that the artifact was genuine. Well, I suppose if everyone's agreed that it is, it must be true. And there's a picture of the police officer here handling it. So I guess at the time it must have been, it must have happened. But the whole thing just sounds weird, doesn't it? That something so dark can be sold and attract a lot of money. Well, that's in the news today, all about this gun, because this police officer, I think, has now died. And apparently, just reading on in this story, the bullet and cartridge were handed to him as a gift. So it wasn't like he just fired the bullet and put it in his pockets. They presented it to him as a gift and said, you can keep it. Well, it sounds like they do this all the time, doesn't it? If they were so casual about it. And there's a picture here of this police officer standing in front of lots of guns. Yeah, a little bit creepy, I think, and dark, but very interesting story that this bullet is now going up for sale. Now, just moving on a little bit, we spoke earlier about under the knife, and I gave you the example of people who have plastic surgery. And that's a very common phrase for people who have plastic surgery to say they've gone under the knife. But that's not the only time we use it. We also use it when people are ill. For example, after the diagnosis, Jane decided to go under the knife in hopes of a full recovery. Facing the reality of his condition, he reluctantly agreed to go under the knife. Another example, despite her fears, she went under the knife for cosmetic surgery. To address the chronic pain, the man decided to go under the knife for spinal surgery. After the accident, going under the knife was inevitable to fix John's broken bones. So there we are, under the knife. So those are today's phrases, under the knife and under the hammer. By the way, speaking of actresses, and this is not connected, by the way, of going under the knife, I see Pamela Salem has died. Pamela Salem was a very famous British actress, and when I was a boy, she was in a very famous TV show here called Into the Labyrinth, which was about three kids who were traveling through time to retrieve a jewel which could only be seen in the reflection of a mirror. It was one of these very badly made TV series from Britain in the 1980s, but very good, and it's all on DVD if you're interested, but I'm sure you would find it online somewhere. Into the Labyrinth featured Pamela Salem. She was an amazing actress, and in this TV show, she played a witch, and a very good character was played by Pamela Salem, a very nice actress. And like many people of her day, I mean, she was born in the 1940s, she was born in India. And that was quite a common thing in those days. And even in my lifetime, you know, sometimes I've been chatting with friends of my parents, for example, or other people, and casually you might just ask, where were you born? Or they might mention they were born in India. Now, today, if someone says they were born in India, the question that will come up is, really? Are you Indian? Were your parents Indian? But back then, in the 1940s, it was very common for people to be born in India. I know at least 3 people who were born in India. And Cliff Richard, the famous British singer, he was born in India. Many people were. There's nothing unusual about it. But anyway, this actress sadly has passed away. She was born in India, and you might not know her from Into the Labyrinth, the TV show I remember, but you will know her as Miss Moneypenny in the James Bond movie Never Say Never Again, starring Sean Connery. She was in Never Say Never Again, which was one of these unofficial James Bond movies. She was also in loads of other things. She was very famous here, Pamela Salem, and she even ended up in one of our novellas or dramas. as the word is in English. Sorry, novella is a Spanish word. I always seem to refer to them as novellas. I don't know why. But yes, you know these daily soap operas or daily dramas that we have on TV? We have one called EastEnders, and Pamela Salem is in that. Yeah, she was married to the actor Michael O'Hagan. They lived in Florida, um, and she died a few days ago at the age of 80. So, yeah, if you're a James Bond fan, you'll be interested to know that she was in the unofficial James Bond movie Never Say Never Again. That's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed this. Let's talk again soon. See you. Bye.